Shalom, and thanks to each and every one of you for joining us today. Our time together is being broadcast by many of our partners, and I want to thank you all for this. And a special thank you to Arzenu, the political voice of Reform, Progressive, and Liberal Religious Zionists, for hosting this program as part of its Inside Israel series. Welcome to MK, a newly elected chairperson of the Labour Party, Merav Michaeli, and to our four amazing students, Noam, Tamar, Shahar, and Malayan, all of whom we will be hearing from shortly. The essence of the Jewish story, in my view, is rooted in the first of the 10 Commandments. I am your God, who brought you out of Egypt. This is the old story, our deep belief in a God that takes us out of slavery into freedom, from captivity to redemption, from the tyranny of a single dictator, or even the tyranny of the masses in democracies that operate technically, to a culture based on justice, equality, solidarity, and freedom for all humans, created in God's image. The task of Zionism, from its beginnings, that reached in its pinnacle in the proclamation of independence of the State of Israel, and is expressed in our work here at Leo Baeck Education Center, is to build a modern society, Jewish and democratic, inspired by the vision of the prophets of Israel. Public education in Israel, in general, and progressive educational institution here specifically, faces a complicated challenge: to intertwine together democratic values and Jewish tradition and Zionism. To do this is a work of art. This is not a privilege. It is our responsibility and mission. Ki benafshenu hi. It is in our souls. While liberal Jewish values and practices are central to me and to us here at Leobaeck, at this time, the survival, the future, and the strength of Israeli society is dependent on our being a society that looks after all its citizens equally, according to the spirit of our proclamation of independence. I believe that Dafka, it stems from our Jewish identity, that we must ensure that our society is equal and egalitarian, just and pluralistic. The Leobaeck Education Center, as the first liberal institution in Israel, operating in the spirit of liberal Judaism for 83 years, is unique, based on Jewish values expressed through all of our activities. Shabbat, prayer, the Jewish calendar, are all built into the educational experience at Leobaeck. But what makes us, in my opinion, truly special is the fact that we comprise the multicultural human mosaic that exists in Haifa: Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze, and Baha'is. However, it is not enough for us just to get along with each other. We celebrate our differences, and therefore, we grow and flourish as an educational community. We educate our students that the most significant indication of the strength of our Jewish identity is how our non-Jewish neighbors feel among us. Or, in the biblical terms, are they really as citizens among us? It is hard work. A focused effort must be invested so that non-Jewish citizens feel at home in Israel. I believe it is possible. It is everyone's responsibility, especially the Jews in Israel. It is our responsibility to create a society in which the value of equality is our guiding light. This is one of the most challenging things for us as human beings to do. It is not stam that the Torah teaches us to love the stranger among you and treat the stranger with respect more times than any other mitzvah, 36 times. The rationale for this command is because you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. This showed Judaism's deep awareness and tremendous sensitivity. The children of Israel, women and men, know how it feels to be a minority. We were there. Democracy in Israel today is facing significant challenge. Each one of us here must choose which path to take. My expectation is that Leobaeck graduates will know how to show sensitivity and courage to hold on with both hands to the two pillars upon which the state of Israel was founded, Judaism and democracy. Let's now meet.
Hello. I am Noam Manaker Morag. I am 16 years old and in grade 11. I am a student at Leobaeck High School. My majors are computer science and physics. I have been a student at Leobaeck since 6th grade. Before that, in elementary school, I spent 3 years in the US and 4 in Argentina. My mother is a Reform rabbi. My late father, who was born in Argentina, worked in the Latin American branch of the Jewish Agency. At the start of 10th grade, I was part of a delegation from Leobaeck to Sim-Ort School in Mexico. As part of the delegation, I hosted a student from Sim-Ort in my home, after which I went to Mexico and stayed with him. During the visit, I got to experience firsthand the lives of Jews in Mexico City, and I was amazed by how strong the Jewish community there is. Last year, I also helped host the Houston Jewish Federation at Rabin Square for the Rabin Memorial Day. This year, as part of my community service, I helped create a video for the Rabin Memorial Day that was sent to Jewish communities across the world.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tamar Widmann. I'm 17 years old and I'm in 12th grade. My majors are physics and software engineering. I'm a mashatit, which is sort of like a counselor for a youth movement called Bnei Moshavim. And I'm also part of the student council in a Leobaeck leadership program. In the summer of 10th grade, I participated in a Leobaeck leadership program, which I hosted a group of non-Jewish minority from Houston, Texas, in a project called Leland. And then last summer, in the summer of 11th grade, I was a counselor for a Jewish day camp called Santa Barbara. And it was just all amazing experiences, and I feel really lucky to be able to take part in them.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Shahar Zacharia. I'm 18 years old in 12th grade, and my majors in school are physics and Arabic. And my community service project is being in the Tzofim, which is the Scouts, where I'm in a pretty high volunteer position. I've been a student in Leobaeck since 7th grade. During my time here, I took part in 2 delegations, one in 8th grade with a group of 20 other students to Boston, which was an exchange program with Rashi School, and one in 11th grade as a Leobaeck Young Ambassador in Los Angeles in De Toledo High School, where I volunteered in the Jewish community. Those 2 experiences completely opened my eyes to Judaism outside of Israel and Jewish communities in the diaspora, and I'm very lucky to be able to take part in these programs.
Hi, I'm Mayan. I'm 17 years old and I'm in 11th grade, and my majors are physics and literature. I have a few community service places, mostly Mashatim and Sayarut, which are both youth movements, and Model United Nations. I've been in Leobaeck since 7th grade, and when I was in 8th grade, I was in the same delegation Shahar was in 1 year after him to the Rashi School in Boston. And it really made me think mostly about how easy it is to be a Jew in Israel, how thoughtless it is, like effortless. And it made me appreciate it more.
So, hi, my name is Benjy. I'm not a student at Leobaeck, but I have the honor of working at Leobaeck and the privilege to see this today, to be the moderator for this esteemed panel and group of people. Before we continue with the topic, I'd like to ask some of the students, maybe in the same order, to relate to a question. As you all know, the Leo Baeck Education Center, as Ofek said, is a reform high school. Maybe describe an experience at Leo Baeck that you had that you think somehow affected your Jewish identity, the way you look at being Jewish. If you would, so please.
An experience I had was, as I said before, I was part of a delegation to Mexico where we visited a Jewish school there. And I was there for a week. And something that really stood out to me is the Jewish community there is much more united. And in many ways, it's because I realized how easy, as Mayan said earlier, easy and thoughtless it is to be Jewish in Israel. But in Mexico and in other countries, I realized that it takes a lot of work, and you need to always check if the restaurant is kosher before you eat there, and you need to do a lot of hard work to maintain your Judaism.
So I would like to relate to a different experience. My friend and I in 10th grade, we helped organize a Passover Seder for Holocaust survivors, around 120. We invited them here to Leobaeck to celebrate with us, and with the help of Rabbi Ofek and Rabbi Gabi, which are the rabbis here in Leobaeck, I just really experienced how being Jewish isn't just about being religious. It's also a culture and a family. And I think Leobaeck, being a reform school, represents that in an amazing way.
So I would like to refer to an experience I had during the delegation to Boston. We were there during Sukkot, and we were in a very big synagogue, like one I've never seen before. It's truly incredible synagogue, Reform synagogue in Boston, and it was during Simchat Torah, and I remember being shocked by how different this synagogue is, and the people that go there are different from what I know in Israel, both in Reform and Conservative and Orthodox synagogues. So it really made me appreciate how diverse we are as Jews all over the world.
So I'm in once a week in Leobaeck. So a few people from our grade meet up, and we have conversations about a lot of things, but mostly about diversity. It's a really diverse group. We have Muslims and Druze people and Christians in the group, and it's all students from my grade in Leobaeck. And I don't have a specific experience, but just a few conversations within that group that pop up, that you listen to each other's stories and you listen to what bothers the other people about Israel, about how it is to be a Jew or a non-Jew in Israel. And it's just a really interesting, we have really interesting conversations there. And just like the question brought me back to those conversations.
Thanks so much. That's really important and fantastic. You mentioned the thing about Jews and non-Jews. You all, I think you all live in Haifa. Leobaeck is, of course, in Haifa. What's it like living in a mixed city like Haifa, and how does that experience relate to also what you experience at Leobaeck? Thanks.
I think living in a mixed city like Haifa is really eye-opening because you see so many, you don't just hear about people who have different beliefs and learn about them in history class. You meet them on a day-to-day basis, and you learn to live with each other, and you sometimes hear Arabic being spoken, and it's not something you can get used to, that not everyone speaks your language. And I think it's really, really important that people should have the opportunity to see other people who aren't exactly like them.
I actually don't live in Haifa. I live in a kibbutz nearby. So I can just look from afar in admiration and hope that one day I too can live in a mixed city, because I do think it's a very special and unique experience that only in a very few places in the world and in Israel you can experience such diversity.
I completely agree with Noam about living in a mixed city. It's very interesting. You get in situations that other people don't get to experience, and I would say that, for example, in Leobaeck, in 10th grade, I took part in a certain group that we met up with kids from Tamar, which is an Arabic Muslim city here in northern Israel, and we spoke with them and we connected with them, and it was great. So living in a mixed city and in a mixed country as well is very, as Noam says, very eye-opening, and I can also add that it's very challenging too, because it's not always easy to meet people who are not like you, but it's part of the fun, meeting new people who are not like you, and talking to them and having a discussion about stuff that you can both relate to or not agree with each other.
So Shachar said it's challenging, and I actually thought to myself, I mean, it is challenging, but it's also a great way to strengthen the feeling of Judaism within yourself. Because, I mean, if I'm surrounded by people who are only like me, so I don't feel unique in any way, but once we're surrounded by so many diverse people, so you kind of feel special, and it kind of like makes you want to accentuate this part of you and like show what's unique about you. And I think that's really beautiful.
Thanks so much. So I think we finished with the introductions, and we're going to dive now into our topic. So the question is democracy, a value in the Jewish state. And as Ofek explained at the beginning, we'll be hearing from you students and also from Merav Michaeli. We'll start with a student. So Noam, please.
Is democracy a value in the Jewish state? So to start off, I do think democracy is a value in the Jewish state, but especially as of late, I think our democracy is starting to fail, and it needs to be reinforced and it needs to be strengthened. But Israel is a democratic country. We can vote, we can protest, and everyone is free to speak their minds. No one gets silenced. In our schools, democracy is an important part of our civics class curriculum. I have learned in class about democratic values, about why they're important, and how to recognize when these democratic values are being infringed. But still, unlike most other democratic countries in the world today, maintaining democracy is especially difficult in Israel. As the question suggests, Israel is also a Jewish state, not only a democratic one. As such, there are many aspects of our society where these two core value systems, Judaism and democracy, collide. And most of these collisions generate conflicts. And these are conflicts that we experience on a day-to-day basis, like things about whether or not we should have Torah classes in our school curriculums, and whether or not restaurants should sell non-kosher food. Now, my opinion is that in most of these points of contention, we should go on the democratic side. I think it's better to give people the freedom to choose what they want to believe and how they want to live their life, than to pass laws and restrictions that either force or heavily incentivize very specific ways about living. But even so, I think it is important to recognize that we need to maintain some amount of Jewish values in our country, and these are what set us apart from every other country in the world. There is something important about the fact that in Israel, you can sit and eat in a restaurant without having to worry about whether or not the food is kosher. And I think that's something to consider. Also, Jewish holidays in Israel are also different than any other country in the world. In Hanukkah, we have Chanukiot lit in the streets. During Yom Kippur, the country is closed down, and people and kids go on bikes and on foot and fill the streets, as there aren't that many cars. And it's really amazing to see so many people outside just walking about. And it's also important that during Pesach, it's very, very difficult to find food, to buy food that is chametz. So that helps not accidentally eating it. Jewish holidays in Israel have a completely different feeling to them, and that is something we should consider when we tackle the future of this country. And all of this isn't to say that democracy and Judaism are completely contradictory. On the contrary, for every point of contention, there's also a point of harmony. And I wanted to bring one example, which is critical thinking and debate, which we usually think of them as values in democracy. But I have learned that they are also values in Judaism, both in religion and in culture. Ein sakin mitchadedet ela beyerech haverta is a common phrase in Israel, and it means a knife will be sharpened only at the side of another. The meaning of this phrase is that one can only become smarter and sharper through arguments and debates with another person. And this phrase originated from a religious document from a 6th century midrash from the book Bereshit Rabbah. At its core, Judaism is about debate. It's about having conversations with people you disagree with, listening to what they have to say, hearing their point of view, and in that way improving your own opinion. Judaism encourages every person to have their own version of what being Jewish means. In that way, democracy strengthens Judaism, as democratic laws guarantee to every person the right to speak their mind, to express their point of view, without having to worry about retaliation from people who disagree with them. Democracy and Judaism both thrive and grow through tolerance. I think Leobaeck has given me two essential tools for analyzing the problems in our society. First of all, I have gained the knowledge necessary to understand the fundamental values and principles of both democracy and Judaism. This has allowed me to see when they collide and when they work together. And second of all, and this is the most important, I have learned the importance of critical thinking and respecting other people's points of view. I have learned these valuable skills in Leobaeck, both in the classroom and outside of it. In the classroom, I have learned about other cultures and religions in my history and civic classes. In school itself, we have Christian, Druze, and Muslim students who we welcome and accept as equals. Outside of the classroom, Leobaeck has provided us with seminars and lectures passed by people with different points of view. I have heard from people of different socioeconomic and religious backgrounds tell me their story. So, what should we do to the future? In my opinion, our goals for the future of Israel should be, first of all, we should aspire to strengthen the values upon which Judaism and democracy agree, such as critical thinking, respectful debate, and tolerance. As for the points of contention, the most important thing we need to do is listen to what the other side has to say. It is very easy today to fall into an echo chamber where all you hear is people you agree with you, and all you do is get mad at people you disagree with. But no compromise or progression can be made until people sit and talk with people in opposing points of view, listen to what they have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Noam, so much. Really, really appreciate it. I want to, again, thank everybody from around the world for joining us, and really encourage any of you who have questions to our students. And in a second, we're going to hear from a member of Knesset, Merav Michaeli, and you'll be able to ask your questions as well. So Ofek, will you please take it from here?
It's a great privilege and honor to introduce Merav Michaeli on this day, which is the Knesset birthday, which was founded on Tu B'Shvat, 1949. Merav has been a member of Knesset since the 19th Knesset in 2013. She had served on the House Committee and Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, including its subcommittees. Additionally, between 2015 to 2019, she was head of the opposition whip. Her activities have extended over many issues and sectors, including socio-economic discourse, gender equality, the relationship between state and religion, LGBTQ rights, labor rights, and promoting the peace process. In her political and parliamentary activity, she continued her professional and ideological path. For over 20 years, she has been involved in feminist activism, seeking to promote women's equality and opportunity. We had the honor of hosting her last year at our high school. Thank you, Merav. I invite you to address the question, is democracy a value in the Jewish state? Afterward, we will continue to hear the student. Thank you.
At Leobaeck last year about gender equality in the language, and I think it was a perfect platform because Leobaeck itself has an interesting model of education and democracy, and is an example and does really such important stuff, and really is a beacon of possibilities and a different way to do things. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for having me. To me, even posing the question of is democracy a central part of the Jewish state or of Israel is it's hard for me to hear, because our Declaration of Independence says it in such straightforward and beautiful words. I mean, on one hand, it states how the Jewish people is arising in its homeland, and at the same time, it promises to keep equality, to keep peace as a basis for national security. There's a commitment there to ignore any kind of race, gender, sex, religion, as anything that can harm equality, the basic human attitude to people, just to people. So for me, the word democracy does not appear, of course, in the Declaration of Independence, because it was not part of the jargon, if you will, at the time, but it states it in so many beautiful ways that it's a terrible thing that we should even ask that. Unfortunately, Israel was not following its promise and its vision for too many years now, to an extent in which you are even posing the question of democracy being a part of the Jewish state. But this is not something that's just happening. This is happening because forces that are not interested in democracy are gaining more and more political power and taking over more and more power junctions in Israel, and are hurting not only specific people or specific groups or sectors, but are hurting the mere character of the state of Israel. And moreover, they're hurting the composition of the Jewish people. If there's anything that we should discuss in this context, in this specific event, is the gap growing and being so alienating and dangerous between Israel and the other half of the Jewish people in the diaspora, some would call it, I would just call it, let's say, elsewhere, but certainly in the United States, where we have so many brothers and sisters, where Israel does not necessarily recognize them as sisters and brothers Jews. The situation is so absurd that Israel is the only place on earth, the state of the Jewish people is the only place on earth that does not recognize all Jews equally. The state of the Jewish people is the only place where not all the Jews can get married. It's really become amazingly crazy, if you will, excuse my non-formal words. But the fact that the state of Israel, in the state of Israel, Judaism, instead of doesn't get the chance to flourish, it's stuck. And the great things that are happening to Judaism are happening outside of Israel. In Israel, the religion of Judaism became politics. And unfortunately, it's dragging people back instead of becoming the light that we wanted it to be. And instead of becoming something that the world can follow, something that other people can follow, something that it used to be in so many junctions in history, Judaism in Israel is becoming something that really holds people back. So this sort of race that some factors and forces in Israel have an interest of creating between so-called Judaism and democracy, as if there is contradiction or competition between the two, is a very, very harmful thing and a false one. My Judaism, the Judaism that I know, and the Judaism that I want to flourish is one that is democratic in its character, is in its core. This is the one that we have to develop. This is the one that we have to spread. This is the way we need to allow Israel to become more and more democratic through. But unfortunately, we will not be able to do that if we do not gain the political power for the pluralistic voices in Israel to seize their place around the table of the government and turn things around. This is the most pressing, I think, need of our time, because Israel has strayed from the Zionist vision that spoke about a Jewish home with equality for all. It strayed very far. It needs to go back. In order to do that, we have to gain back the political power that we lost and to put it back on the right track. Certainly, Jewish, democratic, a home with equality for all. It is something that is within our grasp. We can do this. The majority of Israelis believe in equality. The majority of Israelis believe in freedom of religion, in pluralism. The majority of Israelis believe in peace, even after all those years of incitement against those things. We just need to give them a place, an address, somewhere reliable that they can believe really means what it says and works for it. This is my task. This is what I'm also concentrated in. And I urge you to not give up on Israel and on its character. We can take it back to being an extremely democratic and a place that is active in people's well-being. We just need to have the political will to do that.
Thank you, Merav, for making the time to come and talk to us and share your thoughts with us. It was really a pleasure to hear you speak.
Thank you.
I'm going to attempt to answer the same question, but I really enjoyed hearing your answer. I would like to add on to Noam's earlier statement that democracy is in fact a value in the Jewish state. And I would just like to emphasize the fact that this statement is said, from my perspective, a secular Jew, in that, in my opinion, there's just this ongoing conflict in the different streams in Judaism surrounding the previously mentioned questions. And I think we even need to ask ourselves a more primitive one. Should democracy even be of value in the Jewish state? So a certain percentage of the population is really believe that democracy is an unnecessary value, whereas others believe that it should be a part of the Jewish state, where very generally speaking, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews believe the former and secular Jews believe the latter. And just a discrepancy between the opinions in the Israeli society makes for a unanimous answer concerning the place of democracy in the Jewish state, just simply something that's unattainable in my eyes. So the key to find is just to find the correct balance between the two values, democracy and Judaism. So the extremists in each side believe that Israel should be either democratic or Jewish, but as Merav said, the majority consider the combination of the both to be the ideal, and I'm amongst them. So just finding and maintaining that said balance is arduous, but by all means 100% worth it, because we need it in order for all the Jews to be able to come together and unite, and that is what the state of Israel is all about. It's supposed to be our home and our nation. And I think the first step in order to achieve that is through education, which Leobaeck is doing, and familiarization and discussion with people that hold opposing views. As Noam said, that we need that conflict and that argument to understand each other. It's the Jewish way, after all. And I think Leobaeck Education Center gives out its students that exact opportunity to converse with the populace from various religions and backgrounds and streams in Judaism. And one of the most significant experiences that I had in Leobaeck, and that Leobaeck provides for every student, is the Seminar Zehut, which loosely translating is identity seminar, during which I was given the opportunity to speak with an ultra-Orthodox Jew that lives in a mixed neighborhood here in Haifa, and hear about his way of life and thoughts regarding Israel. And one of the talking points that he had is the relationship that he has with his secular neighbor, that despite all the drastic lifestyle differences between them, that they still have a civil relationship. And maybe that example isn't the norm, but it gives hope for my generation, at least, for a better future, and that we have something to aspire to and such a great example that we can live by. And in addition to that, it just put a spotlight on two very important values, in my opinion, that are the two pillars for a Jewish and democratic country, which is resilience and tolerance. Just a big part of democracy is knowingly giving up a great deal of power and control for others, and understanding that the course of action that will be chosen won't always align with your wishes. And this itself is very difficult for everyone. And it's one of the, you can say, faults of democracy. And it's even harder when the movements and reforms and laws that are passed are against your beliefs. And this just happens on a daily basis in Israel. And laws and reforms, as I said before, are passed that clash with ideologies of certain groups and subgroups in our society. And if we just implemented the aforementioned values that are tolerance and resilience into our society, it would ready the soil for democracy. So when we can understand the standpoint where the other person is coming from, we can better understand his opinions and desires, and even tolerate the sacrifices we need to make in order to live together as one. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'll get straight to the point. Is democracy a value in the Jewish state? My answer is yes. Israel is a strong democracy. recognizes and gives human rights. It has separation of powers, rule of law, and other very basic democratic principles. And Israel is a truly free country. Unlike other countries, Israel doesn't have a constitution for different historical reasons, but its democratic values still have a legal status, and this legal status is you can find it in basic laws. Basic laws. Those 14 basic laws have constitutional features, and they set the basic democratic rules that define our country. By the way, I saw in the comments that someone asked about the nation-state law. The nation-state law is one of those 14 basic laws, and it has caused an outrage a few years ago. So as you may know, Israel is now entering its fourth election in 2 years, a very uncommon situation, and one that actually we haven't ever seen before. And our strong democracy is put to the test right now. I believe that right now the democracy in Israel is definitely in a crisis. The people of Israel are very divided. Their trust in different government branches is extremely low, which is where I believe the problem lies. And all of the elections cause many to believe that we won't escape this situation anytime soon. But I, unlike many others, don't think that the Israeli democracy is at risk, which is a phrase that you can hear many people in Israel say. From what I see in my close environment, democracy is a value deeply rooted in people here. In Leobaeck, for example, it's something that is continuously talked about and practiced. In Leobaeck, we welcome people of all religions. We encourage the study of different narratives, and we emphasize a safe environment to express opinions. Different youth organizations like the Tzofim, they do the same. And even though my close environment doesn't necessarily represent the whole country, I am very optimistic, and I believe we will get through this crisis eventually and get back to a normal functioning democracy. From what I see, the best solution is that the people just need to regain their trust in the different government branches, whether it's the government, the Knesset, the judges, the military, the police. Right now, the trust of the people in those branches are at an all-time low, and I believe that if they will regain this trust, then we will be able to get back to a normal functioning society. I believe Judaism also has democratic ideas inside it. My favorite example is probably that of hitpalpelut, which is in English quibbling. Like Noam said, the phrase about the Zohar, it's very similar. It is known that when studying Torah in the Talmud, the students will quibble over the smallest details, and they will have discussions about what seems to be completely irrelevant matters. And I believe that this ancient culture of limud is rooted inside the Jewish people, and that Israel as a Jewish state has embraced this tradition and manifested it by discussing things, by being inventive, and by constantly trying to improve itself. So when talking about democracy and human rights in Israel, I believe that you can't leave out the situation of the West Bank. The Palestinians in the West Bank are pretty much living under martial law. Many people, including some Israelis, would use the term occupation in regard to the presence of Israeli forces in the West Bank. I believe that the current situation of the West Bank is not ideal, obviously. There are problems within the Palestinian Authority, which is especially funding of terror and corruption. And there are also cases of soldiers acting in ways that violate the democratic values and human rights, who are part of Israel and a part of the IDF. But I don't think that these singular events reflect what's truly happening in the IDF, because I believe most soldiers have a strict moral code, and they act as humanely as possible in this tough situation in the West Bank. So In conclusion, I do believe democracy is a value in the Jewish state. And even though things might look a little grim right now, we will hopefully become a better democracy in the near future. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so the question was, is democracy a value in the Jewish state? The question was not, is democracy a value in Israel? If it had been, my answer would have been, absolutely. Yeah, Israel is a democratic state. Democracy even follows Israeli citizens all through our lives, even starting when we're at school and we study democratic values in school and we learn about our rights, the democratic rights that we deserve, and then following us into adult life when we can vote and choose and democratically choose the people we want to lead us. So if the question would have been, is democracy a value in Israel? My answer would have been yes. And you might ask, Israel is the Jewish state. What's the difference? Democracy is a part of Israel. Judaism is also a part of Israel. We have Jewish symbols, and our anthem, the Tikva, talks about Judaism, and we go according to the Jewish calendar, and our holidays are all according to that, and we rest on Shabbat. So we have democracy, we have Judaism, but I think those two contradict each other, and they don't go together. So they're both values in Israel, but they're not values within each other, in my opinion. I think a good example of it would be what Shahar touched, the nation-state law, which is a law that made a lot of noise a few years ago. And basically, it talks about a lot of things. It generally kind of highlights the Jewish aspect of Israel. It talks about how, the flag and the symbols and the anthem of Israel are all Jewish, and it highlights Hebrew as the language of Israel. And it never once mentions democracy. And I think that kind of, highlights what I'm trying to say, because this is a law that shows the Jewish side of Israel. And it focuses on that. And it never once mentions democracy, because democracy is simply not a value in it. I'm not saying it goes on purpose against democracy, but it just is not something that it is part of it. And I think we should all kind of aspire to be, to have that balance between the democratic part of Israel and the Jewish part of Israel, and kind of find a middle way where both sides find their place without, they're always going to contradict each other, but find a way where one does not take over the other. I think the best way to do it is through conversation. Take the sides of the people who are more towards democracy and towards, they're not really connected to their Judaism, but they're very pro-democracy, and take the people who are very connected to their Judaism and try to find a middle ground and find a place for a safe conversation without judging each other, or, without starting to, with disagreeing peacefully and listening to each other. And I think, I saw a question in the comments asking me about the thing I mentioned in Leobaeck, which is me meeting people who are non-Jewish Israelis and kind of having a safe place to talk about our differences. So the meeting is actually not the place we're doing it is actually not related to this. It's just a bunch of people from my grade who tried to learn more about leadership. But during those meetings, we found a safe space, and we found, we found that we're all different, and we found a safe space to start communicating with each other and hearing each other's stories and hearing, you know, we had conversations about what defines us and do we feel that our Judaism or lack thereof defines us. And I think that's just an example of a really safe space to have people who are more, you know, who more support the democracy more and who support the Judaism more, and kind of find a way to have them start a conversation and talk about, you know, their needs and their beliefs, and kind of find a way to merge it all together to find the perfect balance between Judaism and democracy.
Great, Mayan, thank you so much. Also to the other students. Merav, thanks so much also for being with us. And I'd love to give you an opportunity, if you'd like to respond to anything that some of the students said, but also we do have a question from a representative of the Women of Reform Judaism who asked, as a woman who has dedicated her life to equality, what have been your biggest roadblocks? And have you had any surprising successes or victories on your career? So we'd love to hear you relate to that, in addition to anything you'd like to say about our students said. Thank you.
Thank you, of course. Again, first of all, I was extremely impressed by the students. They're so thoughtful. I mean, I wish, I don't want to sound like, you know, old, but I wish that more adults would have given some thought to the issues the way you did. And I want to say that certainly you've described many of the challenges that we have. But first and foremost, every democracy has challenges. Democracy is not something it's not like a recipe that you just apply. There's a constant need to weigh the rights of someone against other rights of someone else, maybe even, you know, yourself. You have to sometimes decide what's more important for you. And of course, life always put in front of you all kind of challenges and circumstances that you're not necessarily ready for, or that you haven't necessarily considered or could have even considered when you have designed the law or whatever framework you're working in. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a way to make things work. Yes, there are tensions between different beliefs and different interests and different traditions and many, many other different things. But it doesn't mean that you can't have some kind of balance between all of those. It will never be like 100% best for anyone, but it should and can be good enough for everyone. And that is what we should always aspire for. Allow every person the maximum freedom to the extent where it may hurt, he or she may hurt others. And in that sense, one needs to keep in mind that religion is a private thing. Faith is a private thing. Yes, some of it is dependent on community or being exercised in a community, but it is something that depends on a personal belief or faith. Now, you described I'm sorry that I did not follow the names, but you described our public sphere as Hebrew and Jewish. That is, to me, the most major thing about the Jewish state, about the calendar and how the holiday or Shabbat begins the day before, and the quiet that we have on the streets, even though this is, for instance, one of the places where we do not have a good enough balance, because this quiet, as beautiful as it is, comes at the expense of public transportation, which means that you limit the freedom of movement for too many people who do not own private vehicles, for instance. But it doesn't mean that it cannot be sorted out. It can and it should. And then I go back to the fact that in order to figure it out. You need to have the political will to figure it out. Same goes for women's status, and that brings me to the other question. Women's status in Israel is now in a backlash of reactionary forces that are very unhappy with the great advancement that we've had in the last 20 years or so in women's status in Israel, in women's rights and equality. And they are unfortunately gaining, as I mentioned before, a lot of political strength and power, and they're abusing it, a lot of it against women and women's possibilities in Israel. Well, there are always many obstacles. I always say, I haven't experienced this as a man. I look at other men, I know how much more easy it is for them. But as far as experience goes, I've only been a woman, so I've only had the experience of dealing with the obstacles. But the achievements are so huge. I mean, when I started the first ever public feminist campaign in Israel against rape and sexual assault and sexual harassment, it was in the mid-90s. Nobody spoke about it in Israel back then. It was a complete taboo. We were very much behind the US in that sense. And we've changed this reality completely. Not that we've gotten rid of sexual violence, unfortunately, yet. But in terms of the public understanding it and realizing what the measures of the problem are, and we've completely moved from people arguing about the issue itself. We have legislated against the existence of prostitution. Again, we're just in the beginning of this journey to actually not have prostitution anymore. I don't know if you saw the headline in Haaretz this morning that 30% of women in prostitution try to kill themselves at some point. 30%, just think about it. So yes, we have many achievements all the time, and I, for one, always remember where we come from. I always remember that it's only 100 years ago that we have gotten the vote for the first time. And if you look at what we've achieved ever since then, it's like, wow, of course we're going to get everything that we're planning to get in the future. And when we meet next time, we will speak about what it means to turn states not only into democratic, but also into feminist. Because as Carol Gilligan says, feminism is the movement that will free democracy from patriarchy. So there's a lot to look forward to.
So I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody. This has been really special. We're actually 1 minute after the hour. I want to remind you all that there are upcoming events by Arzenu. Look out for them. Some of the announcements were on the banner below. We really invite all of you to reach out to us, be in touch with the Leo Baeck Education Center, come visit us once travel will be allowed. And again, thank you to Noam and Tamar and Shahar and Malayan, and of course, Merav, and of course, Ofek. So everybody have a safe and healthy rest of the day, and we look forward to being in touch again. Thank you all so much.